The savannah felt suffocatingly still, the air heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The lioness's shallow breaths, now quieter but still audible, were the only signs of life in the otherwise silent landscape. The man's gaze never left her as he assessed the situation. Her eyes remained open, though unfocused, and she gave no sign of aggression or fear. There was no growl, no swipe of a paw, just the slow rise and fall of her chest, each breath a silent testament to her struggle. It was as if the world around her had paused, and all that mattered in that moment was the fragile life before him. The man took another step closer, his movement slow, deliberate. He could feel his pulse quicken as he knelt by her side, careful not to startle her. The lioness's fur was matted, her body shivering slightly, not from the cold, but from something deeper, pain, exhaustion, or the shock of whatever had happened to her. Her golden coat, once a symbol of strength, now appeared dulled, as if the light had dimmed from within her. She was no longer a predator at the top of the food chain. She was a victim of something far beyond her control. His hands trembled slightly as he reached toward her, his fingers brushing gently against her back. He had seen the way animals responded to human touch, but this was different. The lioness didn't recoil. Instead, her body seemed to soften ever so slightly, as if she understood that he wasn't a threat. Her breathing, once erratic and shallow, began to even out just a little, the tension in her muscles loosening bit by bit. It was a small victory, but one that gave the man hope. Her eyes fluttered again, barely managing to meet his gaze for a fleeting moment. In that shared look, the unspoken communication between them was palpable. The man's heart clenched with the realization that, in her weakened state, she was no longer the fierce predator of the plains. She was a creature in need of protection. His mind raced with questions. How had she come to this state? Was this injury the result of a territorial battle, or something more sinister, like a predator attack? The lioness's condition suggested something more than mere exhaustion. She had been hurt deeply, but the injury remained unclear. He could feel the faint pulse of life beneath her skin, and the knowledge that she was alive was both a relief and a heavy burden. She wasn't beyond saving, but the man knew he couldn't do it alone. She needed more than just his presence. She needed care, and she needed time. He gently lifted his hand from her back and stood, his mind already thinking ahead. He had to find help, someone who could assist with the wound, someone who understood the delicate balance of life in the wild. But leaving her alone, even for a moment, seemed impossible. Her vulnerability had opened a connection between them, and the weight of that bond made it hard to walk away. The lioness let out a soft, involuntary whimper, as though urging him to stay, to not leave her in her time of need. The sound tore at the man's heart, and his resolve hardened. He couldn't leave her like this, not when there was still hope. He moved slowly, carefully assessing the terrain around them for any sign of her pride or a safer place to shelter her. Every movement was made with precision and patience. This was a life on the line, and every second counted. He would not let her face this alone. As he gathered his bearings, his eyes scanned the vast expanse of the savannah once more. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting a golden light over the plains. The man could sense that time was running out. He needed to act quickly, but without rushing. The lioness's breathing, though steadying, was still weak. There was no telling how long she had been like this. He knew the savannah well. Once an animal showed signs of vulnerability, It was often only a matter of time before predators would take advantage. He couldn't let that happen. He gently placed his hand back on her side, giving her one last comforting touch. "I'm not leaving," he whispered softly, more to himself than to her. His voice seemed to ease the tension in her for a moment, and she let out a soft exhale. The world around them seemed to hold its breath again, as though waiting for the next move in this fragile dance of survival. The lioness's gaze softened, her body trembling less. She had accepted his presence, and for that he would be her protector for as long as it took. The man stood once more, his heart heavy but determined. There was no turning back now. He would find the help she needed. Together, they would navigate the delicate line between life and death in the unforgiving savannah. The man stood slowly, his gaze never leaving the lioness. Her body was still, save for the faint rise and fall of her chest, but it was enough to reassure him that she was still holding on. The savannah stretched out before him, its silence pressing against him like a heavy weight. The lioness lay motionless, but there was a flicker of life left in her. Every shallow breath she took seemed to echo the urgency of the situation, and the man felt that urgency pulse through him like a second heartbeat. He couldn't do this alone. He reached for the radio, his fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the buttons. The weight of the moment settled in his chest, tightening with every second that passed. He clicked the button, his voice coming out steady, but edged with the kind of urgency that only the wild could evoke. "This is Ranger 12. I've found a lioness in distress. She's collapsed, and there's a severe wound on her side. I need immediate assistance. Over." He waited, listening to the crackling silence on the other end of the line. It felt endless, the seconds stretching longer than they should. The lioness's breath remained weak, though it had steadied just slightly. But there was no denying the danger she was in. She wasn't out of the woods yet. She was far from it. Every minute that passed felt like a lifetime, each second pressing harder on his chest. Finally, the radio buzzed, a lifeline that broke the silence. "We're on our way, Ranger 12. Stay with her. We'll be there soon." A sigh of relief escaped the man's lips, but it was brief. The lioness was still so fragile, so close to slipping away. He turned back to her, kneeling by her side once more. The moment stretched as he watched her struggle to stay awake, her eyelids fluttering weakly. Her side was still and silent under his hand, but the slight tremble of her muscles beneath his touch told him all he needed to know. She was fighting, though she had little strength left. The wound on her side, still hidden beneath the weight of her fur, was serious. It had to be treated soon. If they didn't act, her chances of survival were slim. The air around them seemed to stand still, and the savannah felt almost unbearably quiet. There were no distant calls of birds, no rustle of the grass, only the soft sound of the lioness's breathing and the man's steadying heartbeat. The world had narrowed down to this moment, and nothing else mattered but getting her the help she needed. The man's hand remained on her side, a gesture of calm and comfort, even if it meant little in the grand scheme of things. His voice, barely a whisper, was a promise to the lioness, an offering of hope in this desperate moment. "Help is on the way," he murmured, as though saying the words could somehow make it so. The lioness's body tensed for just a moment, as if responding to his voice. But then, slowly, her muscles relaxed again, and her breathing steadied. There was no growl, no movement. There was only quiet acceptance on both sides. For the briefest of moments, the tension in the air lifted, replaced by a fragile trust that hung between them like a thin thread. The lioness was still, her eyes slowly closing again, as though trying to preserve the energy she had left. She wasn't quite asleep, but her awareness was dimming, her body slipping into something close to rest. The man stayed by her side, his own exhaustion settling in, but there was no time to rest. The rangers were on their way, but it was up to him to keep the lioness steady until they arrived. The world around them felt vast, and the silence of the savannah was deafening in the weight of this waiting game. The man's mind raced with thoughts of what he could do to help her, but all he could offer now was his presence, quiet, unhurried, and steady. His hand never left her side, and though he knew he couldn't save her alone, he also knew that his presence made a difference. The soft touch of a human in a vast, wild world could mean everything in a moment like this. He stayed close, whispering to her softly as the minutes passed, each second drawing them closer to the moment when the help would arrive. As the man remained beside the lioness, his hand gently resting on her side, he felt a subtle shift in the air around them. The savannah, which had felt so alive moments before, seemed to fall into an even deeper stillness. The usual hum of life, the distant calls of birds, the rustling of the wind through the grass, seemed to quieten as if nature itself was holding its breath. It was then that the man heard it, a soft rustling from the grasses, faint but distinct. The lioness's eyes flickered open again. This time her gaze no longer filled with confusion, but something new, something maternal. There was a calmness in her eyes, an understanding that seemed to center her in the midst of her pain. The man turned slowly, his gaze scanning the surrounding area. He wasn't sure what had caught his attention at first, but as he watched, two small figures began to emerge at the edge of the grass, the cubs. Their movements were hesitant, uncertain at first as they crept forward, their tiny legs awkwardly navigating the tall grass. They were small, their bodies unsteady, their steps unsure as they ventured toward their mother. Their wide eyes were filled with confusion, but there was also a silent determination in their movements. The cubs paused, just a few feet away from their mother, their ears flicking nervously as they took in the strange scene around them. They were too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, but their instinctive pull toward their mother was undeniable. For a brief moment, the lioness's body stiffened, her muscles tightened, and she made an effort to lift her head toward her cubs, but the strain of the injury was clear. Every small movement seemed to cause her body to tremble, her wound still raw and painful. Despite this, her amber eyes softened as they met the gaze of her young ones. She was still their mother, despite the weakness in her body, still tethered to them by a bond stronger than the pain she was experiencing. The cubs, unaware of the severity of her condition, seemed drawn to her, their natural curiosity propelling them closer. But they stopped short, unsure, waiting for a sign from their mother. The man watched this delicate interaction, his heart heavy with a mixture of admiration and sadness. He knew that his presence, though necessary earlier, had now disrupted the natural course of things. He stayed still, his breath slow and steady, allowing the mother and her cubs the space they needed. There was no rush in the cubs' movements, only a gentle, tentative approach as they edged closer to the lioness. The first cub reached her side, its small nose twitching as it sniffed the air, its little head nudging her gently. The second cub followed, standing beside the first, its tiny body brushing up against her side, offering what silent comfort it could. The lioness responded in kind, shifting ever so slightly to meet their touch, her body still trembling but undeniably present in the moment. Her large, powerful form was weakened, but in this small act she seemed to regain a part of herself. The cub's soft nudges, their quiet presence, spoke of a bond that needed no words. Despite the lioness's physical frailty, she was still their mother, still the protector of their world. The man remained at a respectful distance, his heart full as he watched this tender reunion unfold. The lioness, though in pain, was fully aware of her cub's presence. Her response, though small, was a powerful reminder of the unbreakable bond between mother and child in the wild. The cub's soft touches and the lioness's subtle movements toward them created a space of quiet reassurance, a moment that transcended the violence of the savannah and spoke of the deeper forces at work in nature. The man exhaled, his chest tight with the weight of what had just unfolded. In this moment, the lioness and her cubs had found each other again, despite the odds. The bond between them was a quiet force, one that no wound, no danger could sever. The man understood that this was their time now, their moment of healing. His role was done, and all he could do was bear witness to the quiet strength of a mother's love and the fragile yet resilient connection between a mother and her young. The lioness's breathing slowed, each inhale and exhale deeper than the last, as she turned her head to look at her cubs. Her eyes, once clouded with pain, now held a quiet focus. There was a subtle shift in her posture, a soft return of strength, as though the sight of her cubs had sparked something deep within her. She was still weak, her body trembling with exhaustion, but in her gaze there was a flicker of determination. The first cub, sensing the change, nudged her gently, its small, warm body pressing against hers. The lioness responded with a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a low, tender noise that escaped her throat, a sound so filled with love and reassurance that it seemed to carry the weight of everything she had endured. It was a sound only a mother could make, a quiet plea for comfort and connection. The second cub, still small and fragile, stepped forward carefully, its tiny form inching closer to its mother. The lioness, though still trembling, made a slow effort to lift her head. The movement was laborious, her body straining with the effort, but her gaze never wavered from the cubs. For a moment, everything around them seemed to fade, the wind, the rustling of the grass, until there was only the delicate, almost imperceptible dance of mother and child. The man, standing at a respectful distance, held his breath, aware that he was witnessing something profound. He had seen many moments of animal interaction, but this felt different. This was not just survival. It was the quiet, unspoken strength of motherhood unfolding before him. The cubs continued to nudge their mother, their small forms pressing in as though their tiny bodies could somehow give her the strength she needed to rise. There was no urgency in their movements, just a quiet, patient encouragement. The lioness, despite the tremor in her limbs, shifted again, a low grunt of effort escaping her as she pushed against the ground with her legs. The strain was visible in every muscle, yet there was no frustration, only determination. Slowly her body rose a few inches, and the cubs, sensing the change, pressed in closer, offering their small, warm bodies as support. It was a delicate dance, one of trust, of recognition. The lioness and her cubs were communicating without words, their bond stronger than any physical limitation. The man stood silently, his heart heavy with a quiet respect. He had done all he could. He had offered help, given the lioness the time and space she needed, but now it was her strength, her instinct that would guide the way. He knew that no amount of intervention could replace the deep, irreplaceable bond between mother and child. The savannah, with its timeless rhythms, had allowed for this moment, and now it was up to the lioness to navigate the next steps with her cubs by her side. He stepped back further, still watching but giving them room to find their way. This was their moment, a private, sacred exchange between a mother and her young. The lioness's strength, though still fragile, was returning in small increments, each breath of hers filled with the quiet resilience that only nature could foster. The cubs, so small and dependent just moments ago, were now her support, gently urging her forward. The man had been a part of this, but only for a brief moment. The bond that now pulsed between the lioness and her cubs was something that no human could have orchestrated, only witnessed. And in that quiet moment of trust, the man understood that his role was not to intervene further, but to simply respect the wild's unyielding rhythm. The lioness, though still weak, had summoned the strength to rise. Her body trembled as she shifted, the effort monumental, yet there was a quiet power in the way she stood, as if drawing from the very core of her being. Her cubs, sensing their mother's struggle, moved in close, nudging her gently with their small bodies. Each of their movements was a soft encouragement, a steady support. The lioness leaned into them, her steps hesitant at first, but growing more certain with each passing moment. It was a quiet triumph, the kind that spoke not of grand gestures, but of the subtle, unwavering bond between a mother and her children. In her weakness, there was still strength, a testament to the enduring power of motherhood. The man, standing still, watched in silence, his heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. The lioness was rising, and with her, the hope of their survival. The cubs continued to nudge their mother, guiding her forward. They did not rush, nor did they show any signs of impatience. Their movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent as they walked beside her. The man took a step back, understanding that his role in their journey was now complete. There was no need for intervention, no more hands to offer. The lioness and her cubs, though once on the brink, had found their way back to one another. The bond between them had been renewed through this simple, quiet act of support and care. The wild had its own way of healing, and now it was time for them to continue their path. As the lioness and her cubs made their way into the vast expanse of the savannah, the man stood still, his heart light with quiet gratitude. The world around him seemed to breathe again, the heavy silence of earlier moments lifting as the steady rhythm of the wild returned. The rustling of the grasses, the distant calls of birds, and the soft whisper of the wind carried the pulse of life once more. The savannah, always vast and unyielding, now seemed to embrace the lioness and her cubs as they walked into its embrace. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft, golden light that seemed to illuminate their path, as though the world itself was blessing their return. The man watched them move slowly, their forms growing smaller with each step, until they were swallowed by the tall grasses, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their presence. The moment between them lingered in the air, soft and fragile, like an echo of something beautiful, something sacred. The man turned slowly, his gaze lingering on the spot where the lioness and her cubs had disappeared. There were no words left to say, no actions left to take. The bond between them had been forged, and now it was time for the wild to reclaim what was rightfully its own. He knew in that moment that some things were too sacred to try to control, too beautiful to hold on to. He had been a part of something far greater than himself, a brief witness to the quiet resilience of life in the wild. As the man began to walk away, the savannah around him seemed to breathe in time with him, the rhythm of the land continuing on. The wild had its own rhythm, its own way of healing, and for this fleeting moment, he had been allowed to be a small part of it. The lioness and her cubs were free, and that freedom was the truest gift. The man's steps were slow and deliberate, the weight of the moment settling in his chest, knowing that some connections are felt, not with words, but with the quiet understanding that lingers long after the last moment has passed. The land stretched out before him, endless and eternal, a reminder that life, in its quiet, unspoken ways, will always continue.